Hi, folks. Thank you for joining us. This is ICUJP, Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace. And this is Friday morning, August 8th, 2025. So if you're seeing this on YouTube, um, we were all here at this time. So, you know, it's a good record of what your friends have been doing at that time of day. So I'm Rick. I'm going to be the facilitator for today.
ICUJP was founded in the wake of 9/11 under the motto that religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. We've been at this ever since for 23 years, over 1,000 Friday forums of this kind. Personally, I'm very active up here in Indivisible, also with the ACLU, the Black Jewish Justice Alliance, Bend the Arc, a Jewish Partnership for Justice, and I'm co-host of Law and Disorder radio and podcast, and my own podcast, Strictly I'm sorry, that's another good podcast. My podcast is Speaking Freely, a First Amendment podcast. I welcome everybody here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Big.
I wanted to show everybody, this is the link that I put in the chat goes to this ICUJP link tree, and it has a lot of really good information on what we've been doing and things like books by other authors that have spoken to us. Um, Links to things that we're doing, like our Love for Palestine action page. And also you can, from here, donate to ICJP. And you can do that as a one-time donation, or you can do it as monthly installments. And we're finding that, as Steve says, we were built for this kind of work, for this kind of environment. Um, this is a group of people with a very simple message. Religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. And coming from people that have been in the religious community and also secular activists and things like that, that tends to maybe be heard more than it's unfortunate, but you tend to have a little bit more weight than other people. It should be something that's a common sense statement and a common sense belief, but it's not nowadays. So we've been out in the community a bit more this year because of, we've been being very careful because COVID is still around, obviously, and unfortunately. Your donations help us do things like print up flyers to share with people when we're out, share information. Helps us boost our YouTube and social media so that more people can hear about these great great programs. So please consider that. Steve, I didn't know if there was anything that you wanted to bring up.
Well, thank you. First, I want to dedicate today's meeting to the victims of Hiroshima and
Uh-huh.
Nagasaki these days, commemorating that unbearable use of atomic weapons and a terrible warning that with conventional weapons and elsewhere is not being heeded around the world today, and to the victims of that American caused war crime. I also want to announce a save the date for Sunday, September 14. We have an annual George Regas Courageous Peacemaker Awards event. George Regas was the convener of ICUJP, a towering figure in the peace and justice community who we lost a few years ago. but he was the recipient of the first George Regas Courageous Peacemaker Award. Plans are afoot. That'll be a Sunday afternoon event in Los Angeles on September 14. And Rick and I and a subcommittee are putting together the details of that. You will see flyers on that shortly. It is the major fundraiser for ICUJP annually, although we turn no one away for financial reasons. So please watch future emails for that event. And Rick, as I turn it back to you, you could tell us what's in the works for next Friday.
Yeah. So we have another author that's going to be talking to us, a gentleman named Omar Zaza, who has done some writing with Mondo Weiss and a few other publications. And he has a book out called Terms of Servitude, which is a interesting look at how social media companies have been driving a lot of the narrative about the Middle East and about Palestine and Gaza, and how um, they have been pressured in certain ways to show one side of the issue and maybe neglect some of the realities that are happening. So if you could join us next week, that would be great. Yeah, it'll be a very interesting program. So I'm going to turn it over to our to Maggie, who is one of our board members, who's going to give us a short reflection.
Hey, as I said before, I'm Maggie Hutchinson, and I am a Quaker, but I didn't really, I've been a Quaker, off and on since college, but the whole picture of nonviolence was not clear to me. Of course, I didn't want bombs. About the time I was born, the Hiroshima victims came to my church because we sent supplies to them, as we sent supplies to Germany, to both the Nazis and the Germans who were starving. And we were involved in world peace. And so I really didn't have much of a choice. But to go from that, which was a pastored church, to the quiet Quakers, because I did get tired of lectures, or sermons, I should say. So I have been having struggles with my daughter, who's 46, almost 47, and my son. And I'm in a lot of 12-step groups. So what I do is look at my part in every conflict that exists. And it's so important for me to face my own contribution to the negative feelings that she has for me, and then of course I respond with negative feelings. So I happened to go to a workshop at the annual yearly meeting that was held at Whittier College, which was my college. And one of the workshops I went to was called Nonviolence as a Way of Life. And it so moved me, it was almost like an altar call for me, if you know what that means. I mean, I was, forgive me, Lord, for I have sinned. After that, I was shaking with the impact, because there are ways that I've been violent that have created a schism between me and my daughter. My son and I are very close, but he gets very mad at me, and I can't take that. So I need to work on my relationship with him. And it helped a lot in this group that Dick Bunce told me about, a book called I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, which is about nonviolent communication, basically, and listening, empathizing, accepting, and partnering with your mentally ill child. So I want to be nonviolent, but I didn't realize where the real schism was. And so I learned so much in this workshop, and I'll just read the main ideas that the person who developed this workshop came up with. I'm sure they're in other programs, but just as it was, I could see how much I participated. I'm just going to read the ideas one by one, and then I'm going to speak a little to them. The first thing it says is, I commit to nonviolence as a way of life. To that end, I will try at all times to maintain awareness that nonviolence is the foundation of the beloved community. Refrain from violence of hand, heart, or speech. Refuse to insult my opponent. Be open and respectful of one another, friend or opponent, observing simple courtesy in conversation. Listen with my heart fully present and alert, seeking to understand. Share my truth with clarity. Remain humble and acknowledge my own complicity and personal responsibility for the conditions of this world. And offer my actions as substance for my words and my life in service to my brothers and sisters and all my relations. So the first one, maintain awareness that nonviolence is the foundation of the beloved community. And I do feel that I've found the beloved community. I don't know whether you say beloved or beloved. It's one or the other. And so I feel that this is a beloved community. As the people come in, I see people who are so loving, and every person that I get to know has been a real contribution to my life. I see Steve Rohde, what he does with his ability to bring people together, to confirm people, and to be a source of kindness, really a great role model for how to be a leader who's nonviolent. And I know Anthony Manousis from, he used to be my son's, one of my son's youth directors. Rick helps people to get onto this program and works it out each week so that we have a program. And just everybody that I have come into contact, there's nobody that I've been here with that I have not felt that there was some form of really wonderful communication. And it's very loving experience to come here. Refrain from violence of hand, heart, or speech. What I was doing with my daughter was, when she would come up with these ridiculous things like Robert Kennedy Jr. is a scientist and he's really studied the subject of vaccines, I would do this. I'd go, which is a form of violence. The eye rolling, the sighing, those non-spoken gestures that assume that the person is going to still like you afterwards. Those are affecting my life. Refuse to insult my opponent. Wouldn't that be nice if we had some role models who refuse to insult their opponents? Be open and respectful to everybody, whether they're opponents or friends. Listen with my heart fully present, seeking to understand everybody. And I've been working on listening because of my son having the depression and manic behavior. And I have to learn to respond appropriately to him. And so I go to support groups for parents of mentally ill that Dick Bunce in our group told me about. I wouldn't know about it if it hadn't been for a member of our group. Remain humble and acknowledge my own complicity in and personal responsibility for the conditions of this world. When was the last? Well, I did go to several of the demonstrations. I have to say that I'm willing to do demonstrations, but I've not written. I have a phone number that I could actually call and leave a message to President Trump. haven't done that. So I've been complicit in that respect. And of course, I pay taxes dutifully, because in addition to wanting peace, I also don't want to get in trouble. I wouldn't mind, well, I shouldn't say I wouldn't mind being killed, but I think dying is better than getting in trouble. So, and I'd like to get into good trouble, and I'd like to be able to do it in a nonviolent way. And I do think that because I gave blood, I do offer my life in service to my brothers and sisters and my relations. So there's, other than with my dearest family, I have pretty good relations, but I have to say that those things that I've done that show disrespect are a form of violence. So with my family, so I have much amends to make, and I'm working on it. I only heard all this in June the 20th. So after June, whenever it was that we had our yearly meeting. So I haven't been completely transformed, but I want that. Thank you. Did I talk for 20 minutes?
You could talk for 20 more. That's absolutely fine. That was powerful. Thank you very much. The idea of violence just not necessarily involving hands or striking somebody is that is rewiring your body essentially. You're doing the hard work of reprogramming yourself, and that's always a lot to do. I was really intrigued by reading a bit about Deborah Kapchan and what her book is about. It's called Taking Leave Between Faiths and Belonging. And it's a really interesting journey because it involves what this group has been doing for over 23 years or 24 years now. It's looking at the inroads of, in this case, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, and finding commonalities and finding common ways to communicate, and understanding what is cultural and what is um, other types of differences that you can bridge in order to have a discussion, in order to make yourself be heard and be clear for other people. Um, so Deborah's going to talk to us about her journey and literal journey, and how that's affected her and her view of the world that she's in. So she's the author of 6 books and numerous essays, and a Guggenheim Fellow as well. And she writes about the stories, art, and culture of North Africa and the Middle East. She also has a book that I really want to read, Poetic Justice, an anthology of contemporary Moroccan poetry. And it was shortlisted for the American Literary Translators Association's Prize for Poetry in 2021. And Taking Leave is coming out, I believe, in September, right? As part of Duke University Press's Practices series, which is, I'll put a link in the chat as well for that, because it seems like a very interesting series of books that people are writing about, and seeing the deeper meanings of what they're doing. I think all of us can benefit from maybe adding to our summer reading list in this case, or in Deborah's case, the fall reading list. So if everybody else can go on mute, that would be great. And Deborah, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm very appreciative of this opportunity to meet you all, to find out more about your organization, which is clearly a very needed and important one, especially at this moment. But, we've had so many moments like this in history. It's easy to forget that we've been here before, but maybe not quite in the same way. But things are certainly dire for many of us on the planet. And so I applaud you for doing the work you're doing, and I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to talk to you about my book, which, I think it's timely because, in fact, it takes place in Jerusalem. And it is a book about how we live in between identities. And actually, this is a uncorrected proof, but so it's a paper thing, but it's not on the market yet. But I would like to read just a little bit from it, and maybe in a little bit of a while. It takes place during 3 days in Jerusalem, where I do the pilgrimages of the three religions of the book: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Now, that may be heretical, depending on your point of view, but I was raised in two of those traditions and spent 30 years practicing a third. So I feel at home in all of those traditions. My mother was a Christian. She converted to Judaism to marry my father, but never really practiced Judaism. To the contrary, she practiced Christianity, and I went through an evangelical phase in my high school years. My father, Jewish, but I did not grow up with him, so I didn't have the daily contact with tradition or the holiday contact either. And then 30 years I've spent more than 30 years in Morocco, but 30 years at least of research and practice with Sufi Muslims. And, Sufism is kind of the mystical branch of Islam. And so this book brings together all of those traditions. It takes place, as I say, in the 3 days where I'm doing the three pilgrimages. But each day there are flashbacks. So when I'm doing the Christian pilgrimage, there are flashbacks to my Christian childhood. When I'm doing the Jewish pilgrimage, there are flashbacks and flash forwards to my very present involvement in the Jewish community, and of late, particularly in Abu Dhabi, of all seemingly unlikely places. And then my 30 years in Morocco and in France, practicing with Sufis and understanding that tradition. So I'll show you a few photographs. I have a lot, and I won't go through them all, but I will give you a taste, I hope, of first the frame of the book, then perhaps, as you like, Rick, I can maybe read a little bit from the book, very short passages, and maybe return to the slides so you can hear the music. Let me say also that I am a recently retired, electively retired professor from New York University. I am trained as a folklorist and an anthropologist, and my method for all of this research and for my life really is ethnographic, meaning I go into a cultural context that is not my own. I immerse myself in it, give myself to it, body, soul, and spirit, and learn not just intellectually as a historian might do, but actually through my senses and my experience. Philosophers would say phenomenologically. So this is the book, Taking Leave. We can discuss a little bit later why the title. It is in the Practices series, and most of the other books in the series are things like running or raving. Someone wrote a book about queer raving practices. What is my practice? And so I had to really think long and hard, because I am between traditions, and I have practiced with many traditions. So it seemed to me that my practice was about taking leave, and we can talk a little bit more about what that means later. But I don't mean to confuse you with all these arrows. On the left side of your screen, you can imagine New York. My first leave taking was to France when I was 17. Then I went to Morocco when I was 24, lived there for many years. And in 2018, went to Abu Dhabi, primarily because my university has a campus there, and I stayed there for 6 years. At that time, I went to Israel as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Gnawa, so those are the arrows from sub-Saharan Africa north, but we'll get there. So my first leave, so the first leave taking, not the first chronologically, but the first one I'm going to talk about, takes place in Abu Dhabi, which you see is way to the right of your screen, just below Iran, above Saudi Arabia and Oman. I have to say that I was very taken with this place. It is a beautiful place. It is an archipelago. The waters are visibly clean. I don't know how much plastic they have in them. That's invisible, but there are dolphins swimming in the sea, and there's desert. The architecture, everything's new, of course. It's only 53 years old, this country. And the flora and the fauna are quite engaging, and my time there was very dear to me. While I was there in 2020, you might remember the Abraham Accords were signed. That was during the first Trump presidency, and during those accords basically established diplomatic relations with Israel between the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. This was quite eventful and politically. Flights between the UAE and Tel Aviv became frequent, and of course, not just diplomatic relations, but a lot of business relations were forged. At that time, they began building what they call the Abrahamic family house. And here you see the mock-up for it. It's a synagogue, a mosque, and a church, all connected by a marble esplanade. The UAE government is very vocal and concerned about being an interfaith, about providing an interfaith opportunities. And the fact is that more than 85% of the population in the UAE is not Emirati, but rather comes from outside of the Emirates, a large expatriate community of many faiths. So they are visibly welcoming. I'm not doing politics for the UAE, but they are creating a space where the three religions of the book can find a home. So that was in 2020, the Abraham Accords. Then it was finished in a couple of years. This is the St. Francis Church from the inside. This is the Moses ben Maimun Synagogue, where I've spent quite a long time. And on I don't know if you can quite see it, but the sides are draped with a kind of, it's supposed to symbolize Abraham's tent. It's a metal, draping. And this is the Imam al-Tayyib Mosque, which is beautiful in its austerity. When I was living there, after the synagogue opened, spent quite a bit of time attending services and getting to know the Jewish community. I love this sign because it is in 3 languages: Arabic, English, and Hebrew. But my introduction into this community was not really unmotivated, in the sense that I was invited to attend the first Jewish wedding in the UAE. You see the bride and groom here. It got a lot of publicity. New York Times, all the major newspapers covered it. It was an incredible sight to see the sheikhs dancing the hora in this large hall. I wrote an article in the Marquez Review, which is a magazine that I am on the board of, and I highly recommend to you all. It's a cultural arts magazine of the Middle East and North Africa and beyond, which is also doing extremely good political work. But that article was the beginning of my book. I became extremely interested in the conversations, the interfaith conversations that were happening in the UAE. And while I was in the synagogue, the president came. There's Holocaust Remembrance Day. This may not seem like a big deal to you, but in a country like the United Arab Emirates, these were momentous events. So I'm living in Abu Dhabi, and while I was living in Abu Dhabi, I went to Jerusalem. I actually was visiting the United States, and on my way back to Abu Dhabi, I stopped in Jerusalem, which you will recognize. So this was 2003. I was invited to talk at the Hebrew University by Gelit Hassan Rokem, a very esteemed colleague there. She read that article on the Jewish wedding in Abu Dhabi and invited me to speak at the university. I had never been to Israel before. I have to say I was critical of its colonialist policies, and having lived in Morocco for years, understanding the scars that colonialism leaves. But my mother had just passed away. She had always wanted to go to Jerusalem. I got an invitation, and it seemed like it was time to go. This is the Jaffa Gate, which, of course, everything there is a multi-faith. You can do a multi-faith reading of everything in Jerusalem, which is one of the astounding things. Each confession, each religion has its own interpretation of the meaning of these sites, and they are multi-valent, multivocal. They mean many things for many people. So I did the 3 pilgrimages. The first was the Jewish pilgrimage because it's the oldest. I went in chronological order. Went to the Western Wall, which you see here. Said my prayers for my children, for myself, for my deceased parents, and for the world. Then I did the Stations of the Cross. Here you see a cross that people can rent, Christians rent to carry as if they were, mimicking Jesus through the streets of Jerusalem. I hired a guide, a Jewish guide the first day, a Christian guide the second. He was an evangelical guide, and he does tour guides for Christian pilgrimages, mostly from the United States, and a Muslim guide on the last day. This is also the Church of the Sleeping Mary, Dormition Abbey. Mary is thought never to have died because what is pure cannot die, cannot be corrupted, and so she is thought to have ascended or just be sleeping, not ascended like Christ, but be sleeping until Christ comes back. And then I went to the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is, the third most holy site for Muslims after Mecca and Medina, and prayed in the Muslim fashion in both of those sites. The book is, that's the frame story for the book, but then I go back into flashbacks into my past and my experiences in those 3 religions and what it means to embrace the paradox of living in between. And, you know, it's interesting when you all introduced yourselves, many of you said you were this or that. We identify ourselves all the time in traditions and in genealogies as, I'm not critiquing that, I think it's necessary, but the question I pose in the book is, how can you live in between those identities? And what does it mean to have the perspective of several religions, several traditions, several genealogies? I have some more slides where I can actually show you some of the research I did with Sufism. I don't know if there are any Muslims. Are there any Muslims here? A few on the screen. My feeling is, just given the statistics in the United States, that, which I think is like 10% of the United States is Muslim, if that it would be the religion least known to you. So I, put together some images and some music about that. I could have done the other two, but I think those are more known to you. So this is on the first day, and I am in Jerusalem with Avi, who I am still in touch with. He was my Jewish guide. This is the best view around, Avi says to me when we reach the top of the hill. And indeed, all of Jerusalem lies before us. The Jewish quarter to our left, the dome of the rock on the Temple Mount straight ahead. In the distance, I can see the Dormition Abbey on Mount Zion. As we stand on the roof of the oldest Christian guest house in Jerusalem, I realize that the map of the old city, less than a square kilometer in all, is also a map of my history, a close proximity of Jew, Christian, and Muslim. The streets, like the veins in my body, a cohabitation of traditions impossible to pull apart. The outer circumstances of our lives always mirror an inner reality, I think to myself. And then the words, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," come to mind. Where is that saying from? When I look it up later, I find it was Lincoln quoting Jesus, who was being criticized. But Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, "Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand." Why is it so difficult to inhabit the spaces between the three religions of the book? Why is it that despite the similar characters in their stories, any one of these religions demands an exclusivity that goes counter to the love, acceptance, and peace they all eulogize? Is it a blessing or a curse to be able to inhabit different perspectives, to know in one's body the orientation of another language, another sacred culture? How can I reside in that multiplicity without falling apart, to be without belonging? Perhaps it's that question that led me to Islam, a religion with no claim on me, at least not one I remembered. I don't know, Rick, if you want to ask a few questions.
Yeah, it's been very interesting because when I first started reading about your book and reading excerpts and stuff, and I came at it from two different ways. Leave taking, as in the act of going somewhere and being introduced to new experiences. But there's also in English folk music the idea of leave taking, where you're bemoaning leaving your loved one, leaving your home, leaving your family. And from there are songs like The Parting Glass, which is an old Irish tune about that. I think Dylan's Boots of Spanish Leather is another one where it is essentially about that. So that's one thing that struck me, is that I think um, the focus is not only on the experiences that you are having in these places, but also maybe something that you've left behind, right? And um, have you found that the terrain is different as you come back to, as your perspective changed on your home and your, the life that you come back to in that respect?
So those terms are really interesting, just even home or
Mhm.
coming back itself. I'm not sure I do come back. I'm not sure I've found a home except in my body, perhaps, or in spiritual practice. But um, taking leave for me, it's, within the verb leave etymologically, we have leifen, which actually means to remain. So within the title for me, it's both a taking leave and a remaining and a remainder. And how can we take our leave? From what can we take our leave? For me, taking leave is also about non-attachment. So a kind of letting go into other spaces that are non-familiar and non-familial even. The social narratives that are constructed by our culture, by our religions, by our traditions, by our families. We are entrained, in a sense, to follow those narratives and those scripts. What happens when we don't? Can we take our leave from identities that are genetic or not? Is that where identity lies, in our genes? Or is it culture? You mentioned in the very beginning, is religion cultural? What part of it is cultural? What part of it is spiritual? For me, what I find is that religions are largely cultural, primarily cultural. And the three religions that I know the best meet in the mystical practices, which are embodied practices, which are often sound practices, chanting, prayer, prostration with the body, song. Some Sufis whirl, others move their body. We have sacred choreographies in the Christian tradition. Those mystical practices, we have davening in the Jewish tradition, are the things that bring us all into a state that is not particularly cultural. It is, in fact, the place we find unity and where all of these traditions are joined and are one in some way, in a very deep way. So for me, the taking leave is of culture, is of tradition, is of the narrative scripts that we've been given. And of course, we're always leaving something. Time waits for no one, right? Time and tide wait for no man, said Chaucer. When you mentioned Dylan, but I think about the Rolling Stones as well. It's just, we move on, we're constantly taking our leave. And the home that you're talking about is perhaps an idea. It's perhaps what impels us to move. For Sufis, it's the separation with the beloved. It's the separation from God. We're always homeless and we're always seeking our home in a spiritual connection. And for me, those that spiritual connection is not in any one tradition. It's in all traditions, in the esoteric forms of those traditions. So it's, the book is an exploration of these things as I wander through Jerusalem, where so much blood has been shed. It's just, not just recently, for thousands of years. I don't know if you know the book Jerusalem, a biography by Montefiore, I think it's Montefiore, it was 4,000 years of history, 2,000 before the Christian era, 2,000 after, through the lens of one city. So not through the lens of a culture or a population or people who are laying claim, through the lens of a city. And, it has changed hands so many times. The Christians have been rulers, the Muslims have been rulers, the Jews have been rulers. And, it continues. This is where what we're living now is not new. It's been going on for a long time. We all know that, right? So the question is, and I love the fact that you all brought this question up, so many of you, and Maggie in particular, how do we move without violence? How can we be without belonging? How can we live in a land without possessing it? And, this is the paradox and the conundrum of nationhood, right? Because our very freedoms in the West belong to, are inseparable from possession in the person. I don't know if I'm going on too much, but, the Constitution, the social contract, abolition, it happened because we recognize that everybody owns themselves. Nobody can own another person, right? Which is why slavery is an abomination. Nobody can own another person. We all own ourselves. We have possession of our person, but can we own the land? And the land is a lot less clear. So our freedom in some ways depends on possession, our self-possession, and in some ways it is our damnation that we are constantly trying to possess a land, and particularly Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's very true, and it's kind of like the nexuses of geographic travel. I think you probably, I don't know if you feel the same way, can be the places where cultural arts develop, and also where conflicts develop. So you're kind of those are places that they have to be traveled um, very gingerly, I think, but also very in a very aware manner. I know we have a couple hands up and stuff, but maybe I think what would be good. I think you had a little bit more to share.
Yes,
If we want to go ahead and do that, because maybe some of these questions will be answered
sure.
as we go on. Um,
Absolutely.
mhm.
I'll go through the slides. So I'll show you some slides. Well, let me get it up and I'll show you right away. So I just thought I would put this up here because for me, I'm an anthropologist. Anthropologists were very driven by theories like as are political scientists and other people. But for me, method is so much more important because method is in the body and method is what we do. And I think the etymology of method is a very interesting thing to ponder because, as you see, it's a way of teaching or going, a scientific inquiry, method of inquiry investigation, a pursuit, a following after, a quest, a way or manner, but also a traveling journey, literally a path, a road, a track. So a method, ethnography has been my method. Immersing myself in other languages and cultures has been my method. If I have a religion, a real religion that I would like to proselytize, it is ethnography. And why? Because when we put ourselves in circumstances that are uncomfortable, circumstances of difference where we are not at home, we must let go of our habits. We don't see our habits until they're put into relief that way. When you learn another language, you're seeing with a different perspective. When you're in another culture and eating things you've never eaten before, or having to change your daily routines, that's when you see how much culture has imprinted you with its script. And ethnography insists that we leave our habits behind by adopting new ones, but not necessarily converting and just adopting new ones, but rather seeing the habits we have and then consciously deciding which ones we would like. So back to the map. So here we are. Now I'll take you to France and Morocco. So when I was in Morocco, 1994-95, I began two projects, you might say. One was more academic because it became a book. One was less academic because it did not. But I was deeply invested spiritually in both of them. One was the Gnawa, and the Gnawa, I'll go back to this map. The Gnawa, if you see at the bottom of your screen, came from sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa, brought traditions of Wudan and spirit possession with them to North Africa. And basically, it is a syncretic practice where of spirit possession, which is already also Islamicized. So there's praises to the Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and praises to God, but there are also propitiations to the spirits. And I traveled with them to Europe, and we went to France. Here they are collaborating with Celtic musicians. It was not a very comfortable collaboration, but nonetheless. But I just remind you of what I said before. Ethnography for me is a kind of activism. And in order to do it, you have to linger, you have to hang out, breathe deeply in the space of discomfort without squirming and running away. You have to be in difference and experience it with your body. But there were these two traditions. So one is possession trance, the Gnawa, the other is Sufism. I'll take you through the possession trance first. This is a photo by Adrienne Smulderen, who was a photojournalist. The women primarily go into trance. The men are the musicians. They channel spirits. It's a form of healing, but there's a lot of praise to the Prophet ﷺ and to God. Women are primarily the ritual practicants and transmitters, though the men are the musicians. It's been commodified. You know that, Rick, because you have it on your on your YouTube or on your list there. The Gnawa have become a sensation. They've traveled all over the world, and their music is they have collaborated with jazz musicians, Don Cherry and Randy Weston and others. And this is Hassan Hakmoun, who's the first Moroccan to bring Gnawa music to the United States. But, trance itself has become a fetish. So why? What is this hunger that we have for trance, for these altered states? And, in Morocco, here you see them on stage, but the ceremonies that I went to were in private homes. And it doesn't have an age limit. So, you see these old women with their canes and they're 80 or 90 years old and they're trancing, just like younger people and middle-aged people. It doesn't have restrictions around age in Moroccan culture. Everybody kind of goes into these altered states of trance, if they attend, of course, these ceremonies. This is Essaouira, where the Gnawa have their sanctuary, their zawiya. And this is when they went to Paris. I traveled with them, or I was in Paris at the same time they were there, at the Divan du Monde, a very famous nightclub. So let me play the music. You can see the expression of rapture on those women's faces. Did I go backward? Okay. And I can just play a little bit more music. So the instrument is the hejhuj. The woman on the bench there is the hurdy-gurdy, but the instrument you hear is the hejhuj, a 3-string pentatonic made of gut. You could see how this music in France, where I am now, you would say it's envoûtant. It's enchanting. It just kind of takes you in and changes your state. So now I'll take you to Morocco. So that was the Gnawa. This is a syncretic Afro, you might say, African, North African Islamic form of practice. I don't like the word cult. It's just too laden, but it's not a religion either. I'd rather call it a spiritual practice. But this is Sufism. So at the same time that I was hanging out with the Gnawa, I was attending Sufi ceremonies. And one year I went to the Sheikh of the time, he's now passed, his summer residence, which is in Naima on the border with Algeria. So I took a pilgrimage there. This is the train station. They probably renovated it since, but when I was there, it was pretty run down. But I put it up here because a station, of course, in Arabic, not of course, but a station is like a spiritual station, a maqam. It's called a maqam. And for Sufis, they believe in spiritual evolution, and at different maqam or stations, you get different gifts, clairvoyance, clairaudience, many others as you go on the path, and very often from sheikh to sheikh. So you learn what a sheikh has to offer, and you go on to another sheikh. There's something called Sheikh al-Kamil, the full sheikh, somebody who has mastered all of the maqamat or stations. So a disciple is on a path, a tariqah. You've heard of, a tekke in Turkey, but in Morocco we say a tariqah, which is literally a path through a series of scales or stations. And this station was so old and a mess, and they still had posters from the colonial era warning about obstacles on the track, and they were still hanging up there. But I thought it was a lovely irony that here we are in a station, like a spiritual station, to see the sheikh, and there are warnings to be careful, proceed with caution and prudence on the path. So this is the lay sheikh. He died in 2017. So I went before then, and his summer quarters. Now his son is the sheikh of this order. It's a Qadiriya order. So originally from Iran, but they trace their descendants to the prophet. So the Sufis also chant and sing. They go into rapture. They are not possessed by any spirit. In fact, they would say that possession is a lower form of spirituality. It's the form for them. There's the earth, there's the realm of power and magic where the spirits hang out, and then there's the spiritual realm. And Sufis pierce through it's not that they don't believe in spirits, but they don't hang out there. It's not their goal. heard little by little people go into rapture. There's more dissonance. There, what I would call a more, the notes become more proximate, and they start to, exclaim Allah, and which signals a kind of transcendence. This is a song. Again, I'll ask you to listen to for maybe about a minute or so as the woman and the women go into a kind of rapture, and it is not easy to listen to. So there's the warning. Being in difference is not an easy experience. You have to be willing to let go of your preconceptions and open your ears. And the thing about listening is that you can't close your ears, right? You can close your eyes, but you can't close your ears. So, so that's my little warning, and you can.
سكن في روحي وكناني حبيبي رفي مدى يلا بينا نتلاقى الله ربي وانت يا العالم بيا سيدي شيخي يا عيني يا ربي تحفظوني كحفظتي سيدنا والدموع لينا فرحة حتى اليوم القيامة الله ربي وانت سيدي شيخي يا عيني يا ولله يا سيدي حمزة وشفتي قومي أنتم ربي ولديك رجالي الله بيا
So you hear the women also going into a kind of rapture, but also a kind of agony. And the paradox there is that rapture is often attached to agony or of a kind, repentance. So again, listening to assonance, dissonance, inhabiting the paradox. I have one more tune. I don't know if you want to hear it, if we have time, but sama is what they call these songs, which means listening. So back to method and the fact that a Sufi order is a path. It is a method. Like so many of our other practices, like Quakerism, like Judaism of different ilks, Orthodox, other paths, all going to unity, as far as I'm concerned. So then eventually I end up back in Abu Dhabi, and I'm practicing with at the synagogue, as I'd never had the opportunity to do, really, because I didn't grow up in the Jewish tradition. I didn't grow up with my father. My parents divorced largely because of schisms over religion. And so I was practicing in the first synagogue in the UAE. And the book ends on that note with a question, from what can we take our leave, and what sticks to us like epigenetic glue? And I explore a little bit in the book I'm sure I'm not saying this correctly, the term teshuvah, which means return. And someone asked me about returning home, but the return home is to an original state or condition. It's the return to the divine, not the return to my my New York suburban upbringing, not the return to the Bronx or to my mother's people in Massachusetts. It's an original state or condition of return. Teshuvah often means repentance. That's what happens on Yom Kippur, but it also implies, as you see, a return to moral and spiritual alignment, a return to righteousness as a profound response or answer to a divine or moral calling. So from what can we take our leave, and what sticks to us like epigenetic glue? I'll leave you with that question.
There's a lot to think about in there. This has been very fascinating. One thing that I was thinking about, Deborah, when you were playing some of the Sufi vocalizations and stuff, is how similar it was for me to hear that and hear the same type of vocalizations in like a holiness church in the US. It's in a way, it seems like that's a practice of peeling back layers to open yourself up. It's kind of like all of these faiths understand that we have these things that we've put between ourselves and the creator, whether it's neuroses or fears or, materially driven purpose. And coming back to those kind of things is something very powerful. Let me open up the floor for a couple people. Steve, you had your hand up.
Deborah, thank you so much. It's so meaningful and really food for thought. So much to take away and think about after this program today. But I put in the chat just because it's a quotation and I wanted people to see it even as I say it. And there's a reason. We've had our Muslim brothers and sisters with us more in the past than lately. I don't know how to explain that. It's a struggle to engage in outreach and be as diverse as we need to be. But early on, we had Imam Sadiq Safir and others, and they alluded to this portion of the Quran that I've quoted in the chat. O humanity, indeed we created you into peoples and tribes so that you may get to know one another. And I always paused at that passage, and to put it in a larger context for my question, unfortunately, so much conflict and war has been generated by the fact that there are multiple religious faiths in human history. So much strife based on religions or followers of religions, and maybe followers who fail to abide by their own scriptures, have engaged in wars and conflicts and to this very moment. So I struggle with the notion, the belief that God created peoples and tribes, which meant separate groups, separate cultures and beliefs. would we not have all been better off if we had been created as one people, not into tribes, not into separate cultures and belief systems? It's a fantastical imagination. So I don't know if I'm reaching you that, and I wanted to use this question even more to ask you the lessons and the warnings you may have derived from your journey about the fact that today we exist in peoples and tribes that are often put in conflict with each other. So I hope somewhere in there you got a question, and I'd appreciate your thoughts.
Yeah, well, you're right, going right to the crux of the matter, and I know that verse very well. It's cited often. We can think about it. We created the Quran also says, and I won't cite it literally, to each people a religion. Why do we need to be separate? I mean, this is the big human myth of the fall, right? Of all three religions of the book have the myth of the fall from grace, the fall from unity. We fall into separation, we fall into division. And that's, as Rick said before, that's then the desire to come home, to find unity, to find our state of teshuvah when we're back in our spiritual oneness. Whether it also exists in Asian traditions, right, as well. In Buddhism and meditation. So, but this is the paradox: is that we are one and we are many. And if we were all one, we wouldn't be humans, right? And who knows? I mean, this is a big question, but who knows what we're learning in our evolution as humans? I mean, we are barbarians. There's no question in my mind. You scratch the surface a little bit, and we fall into violence. And Maggie, I wouldn't whip yourself too much for it if she's still here, because this is human nature. I'm not apologizing or forgiving it. I don't think that it's about religion. If we didn't have religion, we'd have other isms. We'd have ideologies. We'd have, race is an incredibly poignant example. I mean, people come from another planet and see that people hierarchize people based on the color of their skin. What insanity, right? Humans find reasons to separate and to have conflict all the time. So the struggle for humanity is precisely the struggle of your organization, is to reach across the barriers, is to understand our common humanity. And I'm not going to sing Kumbaya. I'm not going to say music heals it all. It doesn't. It's hard, hard work. And, this is where I feel like, the work begins here, right? Because we've all been brought up with racisms and prejudices of various sorts. How, it's so easy to see them in others. How do we excavate them from ourselves in order to go into the world with a little bit of wisdom, a little bit more wisdom than we had when we left our parents' nest, right? And for me, ethnography has been such a tool for that, because I've learned, it's instructed me, life has instructed me that, judgment doesn't come before experience. That's a very Sufi thing. You have to live it or it isn't true. It's not about reading, not that reading is bad or doesn't do us good. It does. But we have to experience difference in order to really integrate it into our bodies and realize that and cultivate empathy, right? It's just too easy to hear about people thousands of miles away who are being starved to death it's not easy, but I'm saying that, what would change if we were there? A lot, right? It's some kind of bodily proximity that triggers empathy in a human that screens and seeing things online does not. I don't know the answer. I'm just asking myself and noticing how human empathy is cultivated. And listening is one way. So if I can't go there, I can listen. Listening triggers some kind of emotional response in a way that looking doesn't for me.
My footnote is Brian Stevenson, the extraordinary civil rights visionary, said the answer to racism is proximity.
Oh,
It's exactly the word you use, proximity.
you have
And
to send me
everything.
that quote, please.
Yeah, yeah, you can look it up. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, Steve, when you were talking about the idea that if we were all one people, would we have gotten along better? And I automatically went to one of my references for how I live my life, which is, of course, the original Star Trek series. And there's a there was an episode called Let This Be Your Last Battlefield. Yes. Um, and it was two aliens. One of them had been chasing the other for 50,000 years to bring him into for justice on uh this shakeup that was happening on their planet and the Civil War. And at one point, someone asked, "Well, you look exactly the same. They're white on one side and black on the other." And the Frank Gorshin, the great comedian who was in this, said, "Isn't it obvious to you? I'm white on the right side." I th-
Right.
I think that's what we would ultimately find, something that would cause some sort of schism, I think. So Ipiani, I see you have your hand up as well.
Definitely, definitely. I just want to say thank you for this presentation and the insight that you gave and shared with us. I was wondering, going back to how you hired a different guide of a different faith practice on your 3 days, I believe, when you were over in Jerusalem, I think it was. I was
Yeah.
wondering, what were some of the similarities and the differences between the tours?
That's a great question because, there weren't a whole lot. um, they all go to become a tour guide in Israel. You have to go to school for 2 years, I think on top of your BA or on top of 2 years. And it's a 2 years training. They are trained in history. They're multilingual. They have to be, bi or trilingual. And so they all know Jerusalem like the back of their hand. And, the Avi, my Jewish guide, showed me as many Christian sites as he did Jewish sites. So I actually got a repetition of their. But what was interesting for me as an ethnographer was that I got to ask them questions, right? So I got to know them personally. Avi, for example, grew up in an ultra-Orthodox home, left that tradition. He's still Jewish, but he's not ultra-Orthodox, and became a tour guide and a translator. Adam, a Christian American, married to a Jewish convert to Christianity, a Messianic Jew, they're called, raising their children in a Christian tradition, in a Christian community in Jerusalem. He gave me a lot of insight that the others didn't, because we got in his car and went to Gethsemane and looked over the hill, and he showed me the sites where Christ was supposed to have, his whole journey, where he was the palace of Pontius Pilate and other things. So I got a little bit more, and there's more in the book, which I won't tell you about the healing on the Sabbath. and Christ. And the Muslim guide, a lovely young Palestinian, he wanted his name to be changed. He was the only person in the whole book who, I asked everybody, do you want me to change your name? And nobody said yes except him. Of course, right? Because he has the most to fear. And he was taking, and he actually, it would, you see, I'm a little bit worried about this book. I don't want to put worries too much into the air that they be realized, but, Jews don't go into the Temple Mount, the Holy of Holies, until the temple falls. Muslims, only Muslims go into Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock to pray. Who am I today, right? So that was, what I did could be considered heretical for some, and he knew that. I told him my whole story. I didn't hide anything from him, but he asked me to change his name, so I did.
Thank you. Thank you.
That kind of puts things in perspective a lot. Anthony, you had your hand up.
Well, Deborah, I want to thank you so much for sharing this amazing journey, and the insights that you've shared with us are so important. I wanted to say that I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, because my path has been as an interfaith Quaker. And early on, I was involved with a magazine called Fellowship in Prayer that gave me an opportunity to meet with people of different faiths. And my life has been incredibly enriched by learning about and experiencing other faiths. I think that for me, the spiritual life is about that freedom to explore, to be guided by spirit into places that sometimes are uncomfortable, but always are help us to expand our way of being. And that's why I if God made everybody the same, how boring life would be. I think imagine a field of flowers where there's only one kind of flower. You get pretty tired of it pretty quickly. The other part of the spiritual life for me, however, is about commitment. My friend mentioned the beloved community, and that's another challenging part of the spiritual life. I've been a Quaker for 35 years, and there have been lots of challenges. I'm grateful for having made a commitment to be a Quaker. Sometimes it's been hard, sometimes it's been incredibly rewarding. But I think in the spiritual life, that element of faithfulness and commitment to a path is what leads to becoming, well, it deepens one's relationship with other people and ultimately with God, because it means sticking with it, sticking with this community, even though there have been disappointments and hurts and all the other things that help us to grow emotionally and spiritually. So I just want to put it out there that I think that, that if we can find a balance, and I want you to say, you haven't really talked much about community, but I think community is a really important aspect of spiritual life. It's one of the three jewels in Buddhism.
I agree. It's the Dharma,
Yeah.
It's the big conundrum in my life, Anthony, because, in Islam, in Arabic, they say, Liman du sheikh, shitan sheikhu. Whoever doesn't have a sheikh, Satan is his sheikh. We need a guide and that's the Sufis actually that say that. I don't know that I believe that 100%. That's a Sufi saying, not a Muslim saying, because Muslims don't have intermediaries. Actually, you don't even have to go to a mosque, right? It's not hierarchical that way. But being rooted in a tradition is something I suppose I've longed for all my life, which is why perhaps that's sent me on this search to explore the three as deeply as I have, right? When I was in high school, my Bible was lost in a flood a few years ago, but if it was still around, you would have seen markings in the margins with a rapidograph so tiny. I studied the Old and New Testament so closely. at that time. But the Gospels I know very, very well. Islam, I've also studied for many decades. I speak Arabic, but Quranic Arabic is not really a strong point, so I can't recite the Quran. I can recite some prayers. Judaism is what I know least and what I am really exploring now, because, when I'm saying the obvious here, but had I been born at another time and another place, I would have been sent to the ovens. What does that mean? Hitler didn't care if I was a Mischling. Hitler didn't care if I was only half Jewish. What does that mean? And this whole, I'm sorry, but this whole thing about the mother has to be Jewish and is recent. Solomon had 1,000 concubines, and most of them were goyim, and yet they were all Jewish, right? This is a recent innovation in Jewish thought. And I get you have to know who your mother is to know but we have genealogy, we have genetic tests now, right? I'm 49.5% Ashkenazi. That's it. I am, right? And so I have to come to terms with that. And I guess you can hear the anger in my voice. When I first started exploring my Judaism when I lived in Austin, I was a professor at the University of Texas. The rabbi basically said, if your mother's not Jewish, you're not Jewish, goodbye. I was, and I stopped my inquiry for quite a long time. And I'm quite angry about that. I don't think it's right. Anyway, as a footnote, where we fall, what communities we have, what traditions we adhere to, I think is very important. And I don't know how to respond. I interviewed the priest in the St. Francis Church, Catholic Church in Abu Dhabi, and I told him, my story, and I said, well, do you think you have to choose? And like a good priest, on our first meeting, he said, yes, you have to choose. But then I realized in later meetings that he was a scholar of Islamic philosophy, and we started talking about Ibn Arabi and Ibn Arabi's notion of the barzakh, which is the in-between, and that we are always in between different stations, different spiritual stations, and there's nothing but in-betweens. And once we got to that level, then he said, it's about spirituality. So I don't know how to answer you because this is, I suppose, this in-betweenness is the conundrum of my life. I can say it's the sand in my oyster. It's what has impelled this book. But I know that there are so many people like me, especially in the United States. So many people, right?
I can see. I love the, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, love is the community, right? And so we make our communities with empathy, with love, with.
I love the phrase that's the sand in my oyster. Because those are the parts that are, it's funny. I mean, it's a great metaphor because it solidifies. It becomes more part of you than maybe something that was there before. It's a very interesting book. I plan on getting it when it comes out. But I want to see if there was one thing that you thought would be a good practice for our group as we go into, as we join the world this morning and into the weekend, and a way that we can look at our perspective from your from the idea of taking leave and the idea of maybe immersing ourselves in new experience.
Yes, and listening, I suppose. Because sama is you've probably heard that term in relation to Sufism before. It means listening, and it's ironic in a beautiful way, paradoxical, because as people are singing and praying and making noise, sonorizing, they call that listening. It's deep listening. And deep listening is, something that Paulino Oliveros, the composer, wrote about, and ethnomusicologists have written about it. It's not a new concept. Deep listening is key in compassionate listening is key in peacemaking studies, right? You've probably come across it. But listening has been the way that I move in the world, even when I meditate, because I meditate. When I listen to my environment, the barrier, the flesh kind of disappears, and I become one with my environment. So listening for me is key, not only in a meditative transcendent practice, but in an interfaith practice, in an intercultural practice, in all practices. If we can attend to listening deeply, I think that's really key.
Yeah.
And I see Ruby still hasn't unmuted herself.
Yeah. I think one thing to think about too, I was just thinking about it right now. One of our my great teachers in Bodhisattvas about being in between are my two cats, because they have no idea of anything like a boundary. Um, they know that they're welcome everywhere, and they take advantage of it. So,
We learn so much from animals, so
yeah,
much.
it's true. So, Deborah, I wanted to thank you very much for this. This has been a very enlightening talk, and I know Steve usually says something at the end when we thank
Oh,
our speakers, but I want
thank
to make sure that, yeah.
Thank you for giving me my moment. Deborah, we're grateful to you, not only for your wonderful presentation today, but for your forthcoming book and really the work you do every day. So that's why, with the power vested in me, I can declare you a card carrying member of ICUJP with a lifetime fully paid membership. So we really encourage new speakers, new friends like you to join us. You have a time difference. I have no idea what time it is in France,
It's
but
almost 6:30. I'll be back from the States soon.
so please, you'll get our announcements. We try to have speakers of your caliber at every single Friday forum, and we hope you will join us in the future. And we're going to look for ways to work with you to implement a lot of what you hope and aspire to achieve by publishing your book.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm really delighted to meet you all and to learn about your, in the small way that I have. I've been doing most of the talking, but to learn about your organization and what makes you tick and your very important work in the world. So we will be in touch. I thank you for this
And
opportunity.
No, and I wanted to also thank, as she'll probably see this YouTube video, Misha Gerakoulis of Project Censored, who
Yes.
brought you to us, and who we'll be working with as we go forward.
everybody, please do something kind today and this weekend and this coming week, but also do something for peace and justice. We literally, despite being divided into peoples and tribes, are all one in this struggle for peace and justice. Thanks, everybody. Be well.